Kids laugh. I think it's approximately 140 times a day, adults 14, right? So the problem is we walk without purpose, we live without intention, we don't incorporate enough play.
All right, welcome back, everybody. My name is Dr. Phil Sarpon. I'm here with Dr. Daniel Chille. He has an incredible journey that I think is going to be really important in terms of our conversation today. He's a chiropractor, functional medicine doctor, nutrition fitness specialist. He's everything that I think I am also passionate about in terms of both of our values align. But Dr. Chille, how are you doing today?
I am alive and kicking. As I say, every day above ground is a good day. So thank you for having me.
Let's go. Of course. Yeah, it's great to have you. I want to know a little bit more about your background, because I saw that you were also an NCAA Division I athlete. Is that correct?
Yep. Soccer is my sport.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So we're about to nerd out a little bit. So I played soccer growing up. I was born in Accra, Ghana. Soccer or football is, like, of course, the most common sport there. So grew up playing soccer most of my life. What position did you play?
Typically outside mid or forward.
Okay. All right. So you did a lot of the running, a little bit of the striker game. There we go. That's awesome. And what team or what school did you play for?
Northwestern.
Northwestern. Awesome. How was y'all's team when you were playing?
So interesting. So when I was recruited at the time, we were ranked 300th out of 365 in NCAA Division I men's soccer. And effectively, my class and the class 1 year older rebuilt the entire program. And I was recruited very, very heavily because the assistant coach at the time was part of the Soccer's FC organization, which was the probably biggest powerhouse in Illinois. I mean, my club team, we won state, we won regionals, we won nationals. We were kind of the biggest team. We were part of the Nike Youth World Cup at the age of 14, where we were top two in the US, and the two best teams flew to Barcelona, Spain, to perform in an all-paid expense trip in what Nike put together as the Youth World Cup. We played at the Camp Nou in Barcelona, played against the top teams. I think we finished eighth in the world at that time. And so it was timing and luck, and obviously dedication, hard work, and good coaching, the program that was developed. But I think within my youth team, there were 6 of us that went pro, as an example. But going back to Northwestern, so the team was in need for rebuilding, and that's what we did. Is several of my teammates from soccer's, we were recruited heavily, and then the age older us. So in my sophomore year, we finished, went to the Sweet 16. In my senior year, we ended up playing against Santa Barbara in the Elite Eight at Santa Barbara, only because they had a better facility than us. They could house more people in the stands. We were up 2-1 at halftime. We lost 3-2, and they ended up winning the tournament.
Oh,
so it was heartbreaking. We did extremely well, though. Like, all things considered, we really reversed that program. After that, they went on to do some very good things with the coaching staff and the ability to recruit even more higher talent. So it was an incredible experience, incredible camaraderie, and I always encourage people to play team sports. The communal aspect is, I think, foundational to humanity.
Yeah, that's incredible. Oh, that's awesome. Do you still play from time to time?
I haven't touched a ball probably in 10 years. And the reason being is my practice has been my focus. People know notoriously when I started building it, I was working 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. for years on end. And then having 3 little girls. Now, it's not a substitute or justification. It's just my priorities had changed. My career was cut short. I went to go play in Europe after several hamstring tears, I had to kind of throw in the towel and move back to the U.S. Decided to pursue medicine, and fast forward today is it's a gift, it's a blessing, it's a privilege, it's an honor, to be able to help people. So fitness and health was always a component of my existence. I mean, I say this all the time. My parents, God bless their souls, they did the best they can. And growing up, the sweetest thing in our pantry was oatmeal, and it was instilled in me at a young age. 10-90, life is 10% action, 90% a reaction. Everything is kind of how you react to it. So from sleep, stress, nutrition, training. One of my coaches was the former U.S. women's national team's assistant coach, and he always instilled in me, when you're sleeping, someone else is training. So I had this very, very high work ethic mentality, this high level of discipline, which has translated into the success of building our practice.
Wow. I love talking with either previous athletes, because I think there is sort of this mental mindset, this desire to, whether it's desire to perfect the craft of the sport, or even just professionally. And you have built such a really successful practice. I think one of the things that I really admire about the conversations that we've had is that you've integrated a lot of components of health. Can you tell me a little bit about why you went the path towards being a chiropractor and how you've built the practice since starting?
So this was really interesting, because initially I thought, going the traditional conventional route, as my mom ingrained in me, as most Eastern European parents do, like, you got to be a doc, you got to practice this way. And I saw firsthand that wasn't going to be for me. And it wasn't until I had reached out to who are now a couple mentors of mine that I saw with my own eyes the power of both natural medicine and chiropractic medicine, how you can quickly, almost instantaneously, change the physiological state to get someone into a state of healing and repair. And when I saw that, you can't unsee someone who can't walk, or someone who's in pain, walks out of a wheelchair, or walks out the door off of crutches. I mean, you can't unsee certain things, and sometimes we refer to them as medical miracles. No, to me is we're just changing a physiological state, and we're able to do that with tools in our toolkit. And so my goal was, how can I amass the largest toolkit such that everything is in a hammer and a nail, right? So my thought process was, I always wanted to learn and to grow. And so early on, I decided to seek out whoever I considered to be kind of best in their category, and try to learn from them, and then distill whatever I thought would serve our patients and enhance patient outcomes faster.
And so for someone who is a patient, let's say, and they go into your practice, how would you say you differentiate yourself from other either medical providers in terms of what you do?
For me, like I just underscored, is that I have two things. One is that when I take on a new patient, mm-hmm. I have a unrelenting commitment to improving their health. So I always say I guarantee success. The question is just how fast, because no matter what, between the team that we've curated here, we're going to figure out what's going to move the needle. And the question is only just how fast. And then the second thing is, what really inspires me is where medicine is going and how it has evolved. And now the modern toolkit and how that has expanded, whether it's peptides and stem cells and exosomes, ozone, which is obviously not the new kid on the block, but yet has profound clinical evidence in helping patients, the use of hyperbarics, some other technologies. We're able to really customize a patient's plan with precision. And at the root of that is nutrigenomics, so the intersection of your genes and how nutrition is impacting you. And when we look and do gene tests with almost all our patients, I can customize an entire lifestyle program and plug every single hole in your biology, so we can limit any sort of predispositions. So those are kind of the two components that drives me.
One of the things that has been prevalent in this channel and podcast is, we have so many graduate students who are pursuing the mental health field. It could be clinical psychology, mental health therapy, but also it could be other forms of becoming a clinician. And I think one of the things that I've seen in sort of the precision medicine atmosphere is this component of holistic health and comprehensive health. And so for you, how have you seen everything that you've done and that you do for your patients? How do you see that start to impact their mental health or even their mental performance?
So I say this all the time, mental health is often the most overlooked portion, because you go to see a clinician, and especially in the conventional care. And I don't want to undermine these physicians. All of us, we've been put through the ringer in order to learn. And the question is just what tools do we use at our disposal? And when you go and complain of pain or specific symptoms, what doesn't get discussed often is trauma, right? Or a full medical history that looks at generational health. I had a patient come into me the other day, and my focus has been for the last 10 years is microbial medicine. So the interplay of our microbiome and every biological system in the body that we know that it affects, and most certainly how that connects to the vagus nerve in the brain and the bidirectional highway. And we have more afferent nerves that go to the brain by a factor of 10 versus the brain to the gut. So a gut feeling really does matter. Now, in terms of trauma, that's very difficult charter to navigate, because trauma can come from past generations, and we don't realize that. And so, looking at when we do a medical intake and we're asking, how is mom's health? How was mom's health? Uh, People don't really understand how that plays a role. And so while our genes matter, the environment will dictate kind of what genes we turn on and off. And we can't neglect the environment where our parents were raised or grandparents were raised, where they were exposed to heavy metals or environmental toxins, or now obviously ubiquitous with so many fungicide, herbicide, pesticides, neurotoxin, phthalates, plastics, etc. Where does a lot of this love to get lodged into? Fatty tissue. What's the kind of fattiest organ? Is the brain. And so what gets affected is output, whether that's cognition or motor function. Looking at Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, which is kind of one of the fastest growing um, ailments, to me, it's a disservice if you're treating the brain, because Parkinson's to me is an issue of the either chemicals entering through the olfactory bulb or issues within the GI. Same with Alzheimer's. How are we treating kind of end state issues? Well, amyloid beta plaque that's built up in the brain we see is antimicrobial. Now we're seeing signatures of Alzheimer's patients, high levels of gingivalis or Fusarium nucleatum, specific microbials that are lodged in the brain. And what we do is we try to get rid of how the brain is healing us, right? By putting out these proteins. Same thing with cholesterol, right? Someone on a statin. Well, no, cholesterol is actually the solution. The problem is, what is our internal chemistry? What is our environment, both internally and externally, that's driving dysfunction?
When I think about the genetic component, and I think about the environmental component. So let's say you do the gene testing and you figure out, okay, this is where someone's genetics are, and we can kind of trace this back in their family history. How would you then start to change their environment to influence maybe some of the genetics that they do have?
I call my foundation 5. In order to feel well, you got to eat right, sleep right, move right, talk right, poop right, and then you're going to feel right. So if within the context of your environment that's not happening, say you're operating at 80%, you're not sleeping right, because sleep is an afterthought, right? Sleep is sleep is something that we know we have to do as a byproduct of everyday reality, right? So we try to squeeze it in as much as we can. So now you're at 80%. Say all of a sudden you're not sleeping right, and because you're not repairing, now you're not pooping right, your gut is off, you don't feel right anymore. You're at a 60% dysfunction. That's when chronic disease, autoimmune metabolic issues, cancer, some of these other ailments we just mentioned, that's when those begin to appear. Autoimmunity, as an example, to me is a diagnosis of 7 years. You're not feeling right for such a long time, and it's not always blatant. Like sometimes it can be skin issues that we neglect, like little red dots or skin tags. Sometimes it can be little pain in like our tooth, which each tooth is actually a breathing, living organ that connects to something specific in the body through the meridians. Say it's something in our toes, in our feet, anywhere. Pathogens love to hide in hollow spaces. Uh, in the knees and the shoulders, we see a lot of chronic pain in our patients. So the environment is actually very instructive. We're just usually ignoring it, and until it's too late, or we can see some of the warning signs, but we don't necessarily know how to intervene best, and then we try to take matters into our own hands. And I have many of my patients are smarter than the average bear, or they've seen many other quote unquote functional medicine practitioners where I see we're not all alike. The reality becomes is how can we now restructure someone's environment and layer on genes to be hyper specific with what we need. So in terms of exercise, I can see if someone is built for power, is built for endurance, is built for speed. I had the quote unquote Olympic sprinter gene, and at one point at Northwestern, I had the record for the 40 yards. So it's no surprise that my genetics have dictated my success in large part. Right? You can't out-train your genetics, but the philosophy of hard work and work ethic, I think still holds true, because while someone can have a propensity to perform well in a specific skill set, if they're not consistent with their training, someone who's going to work harder than them will probably outpass them in reference to the sport realm. But in general, again, looking at nutritional needs, so if you're supporting specific nutritional issues, whether it's through detoxification or methylation, we see now if you're not detoxifying, well, because we live in a toxic soup, it's estimated there's 2 billion pounds of chemicals in circulation. We are at a huge disadvantage, right? So sometimes people need a little bit extra help, which we can see, and we can add in those nutrients to, again, hedge against those predispositions.
One of the things that you're talking about is that I feel like there's such a disservice as relates to the educational realm. And in terms of what you're talking about, it just makes me think of the educational realm, because even in clinical psychology programs, we had medical classes about biopsychology and biophysiology and things like that. And I talk to, I'm friends with a lot of medical doctors and holistic health professionals and clinicians, and not enough emphasis as it relates to what you're talking about. And my question is always why, because for me, even as you're talking, I'm like, this makes so much sense. And you've been able to see the evidence of this play out for your patients. Why would you say as a society, this isn't a part of our education?
So society versus clinically, like we're not learning this, or just both in terms of, I think it also starts foundationally with kids. Right? What values we instill. And I say this all the time, like, who's raising our kids? Is it the parents? Is it the peers? Is it the teachers? I mean, because if you look at the end of the day, what happens? So our kids are spending more time with their peers and at school than with parents, right? Unfortunately, you get very little time. And it's same thing with our relationships, right? We prioritize our careers over our relationships. So in some respects, we're setting us up for failure out of the get-go. Now, obviously, homeschooling is becoming more prevalent, which I tremendously support. And it's not that schools are all bad, but who's to say that the philosophy of the teacher or certainly the other kids and what parents are teaching their kids resonate with what you're trying to do at home? And often it doesn't coincide, is what I find. So I think it starts at a youth level, and then it just builds as we layer in societal norms that dictate beauty or success or work or, again, fill in the blank. The problem is that we kind of have changed our values over time, which unfortunately, if you look at disease, and worse yet, chronic disease, and worse yet, the prevalence of chronic disease now in kids, things are escalating very quickly, and genes cannot account for that. And it goes back to the microbiome, because I look at, again, yes, I'm biased, but I see these signatures with ADD and ADHD and neurodivergence. And when I look at the signature of the microbiome, it's very, very specific. And so we're taking a huge hit. But what we're not taught in school versus maybe our I don't know, Asian or European counterparts is um, collectivism or community. I think we're taught a capitalist mentality versus which is more is better, and you got to cheat, lie, and steal to get ahead of your neighbor to be able to win the game of life. It's like this zero sum game where if someone pursues victory, it's at someone else's expense instead of collaboration. If you look at Darwinism, I think it's most often understood in terms of survival of the fittest is really survival of those that can collaborate and adapt. If you look at in terms of nature, it wasn't. Yes, there's a component of you got to get away from a predator, and the predator always has to eat. But there was always kind of this, more often than not, you're stronger together, and that has been my mantra.
I really appreciate the reference to Darwinism and some of these other scientific or philosophical methods, because I think when it comes to that aspect of capitalism, there seems to be sort of this hierarchy component of someone has power over another person. And when it comes to the pizza, it's like every slice for each person, right? And so the more slices that you can take, the more that feeds the ego and the power and the money and things like that, instead of thinking about how can we enlarge the pizza? How can we live maybe in sort of this capitalist society, but have to realize that we don't have to walk over other people, and that we can actually enlarge these components, whether it's health or medicine and things of that nature. And I'm wondering, we talked about that genetic component of realizing, okay, what is in the genetics of another person? Let's say from a nutritional perspective, how would you go about helping someone from a nutrition intervention? Perhaps they're feeling fatigue, perhaps they're feeling tired. We talked a little bit about that ADHD component and things like that. There's so much of mental health that's connected to what we eat. What are you doing in terms of the conceptualization and the intervention as it relates to nutrition?
I see nutrition now as a pillar in most practices, but when I started long ago, that was probably the weakest link I found, uh, only because nutrition is such a powerful lever. Nutrition is going to heal you, or nutrition is going to hurt you. And I find that to be very, very binary. It's nutrition is instruction, and it will dictate what hormones we secrete. It will dictate how well we can sleep. It will dictate how well we can detox, because detoxification is very nutrient dependent. Uh, Same with immunology. Same with even looking at the brain and psych. I mean, the brain is so metabolically active. It's a small portion in weight, but demands so much of our resources, which is fueled through nutrition. So that's where I've gone super deep. And I always look at it in terms of um, your ancestors. So my suggestion is likely, because your microbiome has evolved in that capacity, eat what your ancestors ate and you'll likely do best. Second to that is eat seasonally. Avocados and berries don't grow year round, yet we have access to it year round and 24 hours a day. Eat locally. In the 1900s, one in two had a farm. Now it doesn't exist. We get something off of a truck. Going back to avocados. We have prohibited the use of DDT here, but where do we export it to? To Mexico. Where do we get our avocados from? Mexico. So we're still ingesting the same chemicals that we no longer adopt here. But the problem still remains, is this chemical soup that we live in, the pesticides, the herbicides, the fungicides. So even sometimes people think they're doing good and they're not. And I learned this very, very quickly when I went to go spend some time in Eastern Europe, and I lived in Moscow for a year. And I would buy fruit at the market, which would literally spoil the next day, full of mold. When I first lived in the UK, and I went to their kind of bigger stores, and I had this guilty same thing of my shopping habits. You buy something for the week, and it's good for the week. Well, in the UK, I started seeing like cheese get mold, bread get mold. I was like, oh, that's disgusting. And then I realized, wait, no, that's actually organic. And then that was further amplified in Russia, because while things would last on the shelf far less in the UK, in Russia, literally, it was next day spoiled. I saw mold on garlic, on dried fruit, on nuts, things that I never found moldy prior. And so I realized the difference of what organic actually looks like and what real nutrition actually means is ideally having kind of your own, and that's very typical in that society. People have their own it's called dachas, or their own kind of like suburban farmhouses, or houses, smaller houses where they grow their own produce, which they would venture out to on the weekends, or forest foraging the forest, like things that are very, very atypical here, that exists elsewhere. So case in point is my family part of my family reside in Sicily, very, very inherently organic living. And I would walk outside, just along the street with my cousin, who's several years younger than me, and he would point out specific herbs. This one's for a rash. This one's if you're sick. This one is if you have pain. This one is you have an upset stomach. And I go, how do you know all this stuff? And that's what inspired me, because he said right away, how do you not? That again is the epitome of medicine. Nature heals. And one thing I always say to my patients, and this really reframes their paradigm, is if man made it, stay away. If nature made it, it's okay.
This is the type of, language and conversation, it takes me back to like our educational system in so many aspects has failed us, because so many of my friends who have gone through med school, right, and have very few classes on nutrition. And even if they do, maybe it's passing, or it's maybe like a little bit of a seminar. But when it comes to the practice of nutritional medicine for a medical doctor or a DO, it can be rare to see that. And we're talking about things that can, like you mentioned, can heal the body instantly if we cater to it and if we intervene in the right way. I'm curious about your thought process on fasting.
It's a tool. So again, my goal is to master as many tools in the toolkit. I think Walter Longo's study with fasting mimicking diet has reframed my paradigm in terms of, do you have to go all in on just water? No, and probably maybe not even best, because likely you should add in some electrolytes and minerals at a minimum. And then step 3, you should probably add in some aminos for phase 2 detoxification, because if you look at detox, well, it's heavily dependent on glucuronidation. Then there's sulfation and acetylation, and the synthesis of glutathione and conjugation, and then amino acid as well. So protein, if you look at the cells, they're made up of a biophospholipid membrane, which is fat, and protein, which is the structural component. And so in order to detox, you need to make sure that's permeable so that nutrients can get in and the garbage or cellular debris can get out. And with phase 3 detoxification, through making sure that gallbladder is on board, so the secretion of bile, and that you're eliminating, you're not constipated. So in terms of fasting, I absolutely love fasting. You mentioned genetics. I can see very quickly who would do better with fasting, and I'm an ApoE3/4 as an example. And so I go very well for long periods of fasting. As an example, I'm usually in 16-8 window, meaning I don't eat for 16 hours, and then I try to crunch everything in 8. But with my lifestyle, sometimes it's harder, and I'm actually crunching everything in 1 hour. So sometimes I practice OMAD. But if someone is under cortisol dysregulation or HPA imbalance, fasting is a stress on the body. People don't recognize these trends of like cold water immersion or cold plunges. That's a stress on the body. Exercise is a stress on the body. Yes, there's a hormetic stress, but someone who's already depleted, that's exacerbating that signal. And so we don't realize this is the component of medicine. You need a personalized approach, and works for one doesn't work for another. Going back to genetics as an example, because you keep inquiring, in histamine. So I find histamine as a very high predisposition in people who are often doing a lot of things right, but a lot of things wrong, such as meal planning. I had this one patient in particular. He was doing a lot of fasting, which was great, but probably a little bit too much, because, again, he was under a high load of stress and cortisol imbalance, and looking at his HPA axis and how that affected his hormones. So now the HPA gonadal axis and the thyroid and the HPA-T axis. So what the problem was, he was meal prepping for the week, but had a very high risk factor for histamine. What happens when you leave food out? It breaks down with high bacterial load, which drives histamine. And so that was his Achilles heel. Same thing with one of my other patients, a female patient whose her hormones were terribly mismanaged. But a lot of these people who are meal prepping, it's not always beneficial. We live in this kind of modern convenience culture, but perhaps that's not congruent with your biology. So going back to fasting, it's a tool in the toolkit. I think it's critical, right? It induces autophagy. The body is constantly trying to clean up. We are now just in a cycle where food is prevalent 24/7, and we are no longer listening to our ghrelin signals or our hunger hormones. So that balance of ghrelin to leptin is incredible. So we're often eating the wrong foods at the wrong time. Okay, because let's go back to now circadian biology for a moment, where this was a very elegant study which reframed my paradigm completely, where they took two group of mice. Their circadian code, the book. So they took two group of mice. One was fed healthy into the evening, the other fed unhealthy nutrition, but earlier in the day, and which is rare for a scientific study. 100% of the mice who ate healthy at night all had gained weight. So it reframed my paradigm in the sense of that timing probably matters more than anything else. So when should we be breaking our fast, breakfast, right? Is it in the morning, or perhaps is it in the evening? And there's whole notion of like now your chronological bio or your chronotype of when you should be going to sleep plays into that too. So there's different ways to assess what might work best for you. Obviously, how you feel certainly will impact that. But perhaps fasting into the evening, because you are actually more insulin sensitive in the morning. Why? Because when melatonin goes up, insulin goes down. So it's the antagonist there. What happens is we are staying up late at night, and what do? We reach for something that's usually rich in carbohydrate. Why? Because the number one source that your brain craves is glucose. So that's carbohydrate rich food. When are you least insulin sensitive? At night. So what happens? You're storing fat. You're no longer in a state of fat burning. You're fat storing. So just even providing support in terms of timing or educating patients when it's best for you to eat. But likely, I always suggest nothing good happens after sunset. So we should probably be going to bed anyways, and certainly not scrolling or constantly exposing yourselves to this blue light or this heavy light flicker that is damaging retinal cells as well, because we see that a lot as in our aging population, the issue how our eyes begin to deteriorate, and we call it aging. No, to me, I call that we're not living in congruent with our biology anymore.
Yes. Yeah. Oh goodness. There's so much there. And I'm thinking, as it relates to, I know me and you have talked about, of course, exercise and how that's another kind of a movement medicine. Movement is medicine. And so when you have patients who, I think conceptually, sometimes I have a hard time whenever there's a patient that comes in and it's for psychological reasons. I'm thinking holistically. I'm thinking exercise, nutrition, sleep. I think sometimes, like you mentioned, from a genetic perspective, you might have to optimize their health in a certain way. So maybe it sounds like you might focus a little bit more time on nutrition, or you might focus a little bit more time on exercise, or you combine the two. How are you thinking about bringing all of these tools together? So not just the nutrition, but also the movement as well for a particular person.
So super simple. When you're not strapped by insurance, you can spend more time with a patient, and you can begin to serve as a guide. So that's what I say is my goal is to provide education, to provide the tools to accelerate outcomes. But the education component needs to be relayed. And so, again, going back to my foundation 5, you got to eat right, sleep right, move right, talk right, poop right. If you're not doing all 5, well, you're doing a disservice to yourself. And if you're not looking at that in terms of your patients, well, that's a problem, because like I know we shared on my podcast, we're often treating in silos, and the body is not one organ or one pathway. We are one organism with many organs tied into many different organ pathways. So, looking at nutrition, that's one that we go very, very deep in helping patients understand what is going to be best for them in terms of their healing curve. And I'm a big proponent of fasting in the right condition, but also doing a food test, because a lot of people come with food sensitivities now. And why that relevant? Because food is instruction. It's going to heal you, it's going to hurt you. And if you're eating healthy foods, but not at the right time, you're starting these little fires. Those little fires drive more inflammation, which begins to evolve as chronic disease. So the component about nutrition really is critical. It's also critical in the sense of, we don't realize, but so much of specific pathways or nutrient absorption or our hormones is very much relevant in terms of nutrition. So take, for example, I don't know, dopamine. 50% of the dopamine is synthesized in the GI. We always think, hormones are neurotransmitters, are hormones in the brain. Well, a lot of it stems in the gut. So looking at dopamine, well, how does this kind of come to fruition? Well, what's most interesting is actually our gut bacteria will convert L-DOPA to dopamine. So there's specific bacteria like Enterococcus or Streptococcus or Candida, all not bad, which can help with production of some of these neurotransmitters in the brain, like serotonin. Looking at dopamine, what are precursors? Phenylalanine. Well, what do you need? What do you need for that to come to fruition? Iron, oxygen. So, how do you then convert L-DOPA to dopamine? Vitamin B6. So nutrition is such a key driver. You need other precursors like folate and niacin, vitamin C, magnesium, zinc, iron, etc. But if you're looking now in terms of movement as medicine and muscle, to me is you need to get the nutrition first on board, and you need to get the hormones on board, because that way you're going to now to me, it's the shortcut to accelerate whatever physique you're trying to carve out. Sometimes people just go because they need to go and you need to sweat. Well, my goal is really intentional. What am I trying to achieve? Is this for sports performance? Because we train professional athletes or Olympic athletes. That obviously is super relevant. But even for the general population patient is, how can I always think of what's the minimum effective dose. And for exercise, to me, a lot of the research suggests 2 times a week, total body resistance training. You induce a cardiovascular response as well if you increase intensity, if you reduce rest intervals. Looking at fat or lipolysis, fat burning, well, zone 2, so brisk walking. They did a beautiful study out of U of I that just came out that looked at preserving hippocampal volume with just 40-minute brisk walking 3 times a week. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable what we can do in terms of protecting the brain, protecting the body, reversing disease, or at least reducing inflammation. Myokines, which are secreted by the muscle, is tremendously potent at regulating glucose metabolism, fat metabolism, and reducing TNF alpha, IL-1 beta, which we see in these chronically ill patients who are stuck in this Th2 dominant immune state. And so it will upregulate other beneficial cytokines in place of that. So there's a strong anti-inflammatory effect when you can preserve more muscle, which to me, muscle is now the organ of longevity. And you want to try to move as much as you can. We see here that exercise-induced interleukin-6, as an example, it will protect the brain, because the damaging interleukins that can cross the blood-brain barrier when that's porous, when you have a leaky brain, because you have a leaky gut, which triggers microglial activation in the brain, which is tremendously inflammatory. So now you have this neuroinflammation, which then eventually hits the mitochondria. Now you have no energy to do anything. Really starts with going back to that foundation. So when you're asking, how do you tie the dots? Much like your story, I started the practice with fitness. But funny enough, my first 3 patients were sciatica, a hormone patient, and someone with a shoulder injury. Right? So we are walking wounded. Everyone is sick and toxic. The question is what degree, because we run toxic panels on almost everyone. And the question is just, what's the level of exposure? But your body does it really well. The problem with our chemical soup now is sometimes you just need a more gentle push, and you have to be very intentional with nutrition in order to cover your bases. And often enough, that's difficult. And that's where supplement plays a role, where you can just supplement the gaps in what nutrition doesn't account for.
Again, I've seen a lot of practices, and it can be really difficult from an institutional perspective or from a cost perspective to try and implement all of these things together for the benefit of the patient, without depriving clinicians of being able to also make money and make a living for themselves as well. And so, what are the win-win aspects that you've seen from your practice in helping patients, but also being able to also keep the lights on and make sure that you can do what you can do?
I think you nailed it. It's cost, right? Because people don't want to pay double. They're paying for insurance, but that to me is that's sick care. And that's certainly not preventative care. I mean, while we rank very high for emergency and trauma medicine, we don't for prevention. I mean, our third world countries rank better than us. Why? Because it's part of the discussions. When you said, going back to one of the original questions, it's just not ingrained in our culture, right? People come to see me when their hand is falling off instead of saying, okay, how can I practice prehab rather than going for rehab? So cost is certainly the driver. That's often enough the limiting factor, because people want this information. They want to get better. The problem becomes it's an additional expense, right? Because insurance doesn't cover this. Why? Because we practice what's considered to be above the standard level of care. Any of these tests that we run is, again, considered to be above the standard level of care. And it gets to the root of why someone is suffering. So, supplements certainly are not covered. The movement piece is getting better. Certain insurances have adopted, or even certain work environments are paying for their employees because they see the benefit. The problem is care isn't centralized and it's not standardized here in the United States. And so we know certain things can work. Often enough, it's not FDA approved. And why? Because there's no patent, right? Or there's no pharmaceutical. So without getting political, that's the reality. Is there's a cost concern for patients. We try to make things as cost effective, and I try to keep my costs as lean as possible. That's what I always say. And so in the new year, we're actually coming out with a new wellness membership model where fitness is completely complementary. It is included with any wellness. And so now you get access to us, the practitioners, the team. Obviously, there's a monthly cost, but it includes all of that now. So I want to redesign wellness where people pay into a system that keeps them healthy, and the moment they're sick, we work for free. And so that's the system that I'm trying to build in the new year here. So I have two programs. One is a road to recovery. It's for our sick patients who need to get well. And then a road to longevity, patients who want to maintain that new level of health. Because while health is a privilege, it doesn't have to come at a severe cost. And I see that's probably the biggest pushback is functional medicine. You have to be super expensive to afford it. And I see that because some of my colleagues, I mean, they're charging. I know some practitioners that their hourly is 1 to 2K for the hour to work with them, and they have a line out the door. Other people, that's just not sustainable, right? So I don't want to undermine what someone brings to the table, because my mentor always said, you pay for it right, or you pay for it twice. So sometimes paying a premium certainly can be worth it, but again, is how can we make medicine democratized? How can we make it affordable? That's our goal. Certainly, it becomes difficult because with volume, what is usually comes at a consequence is quality, right? You can get something cheap and you can get it fast, but it's certainly not usually going to be quality, right? And I always think about it in terms of like how we build our houses here, right? Blow away in a in a storm. Again, in Europe, is the homes are built like when you're talking in a room, you can't hear anyone. The walls are so thick, so dense, the material is quality that these homes are from the 1900s, 1800s, like they're built to last, right? That's quality. It takes time. It's a slow culture. It's not convenience. But going back to medicine, the hope in the future is as things like stem cells and peptides become more ubiquitous, those costs will also come down. So I'm super excited. I think that will happen, especially with regulation and a lot of third party over the counter things that often don't work, which then um, people get bad results from, or no results. And so there is always a quality question, but I think the future is bright in terms of we can probably redesign what wellness can look like.
What are some other factors that you see from a visionary perspective? Let's say 5 years from now. What do you see in your practice in terms of what you're doing with your patients?
I think the better question is 1 year from now, because science and tech is moving fast. And now with the integrating AI, it's remarkable what we can do. I had a patient who he did a blood test, he put it into AI, and everything that, we did a consult, and everything that I went over with, he's like, yeah, I know all of this. I go, how do you know any of this? He goes, oh, I just put it into AI. And I go, whoa. And I looked at it, and everything that I was saying was almost identical to what AI was suggesting and how to treat what we were working on. Now, it wasn't 100% accurate, so they weren't making a couple of the connections that I were, but I mean, even at 75%, it's remarkable. Right? So, question is, are we going to be out of business? Maybe people like you like talk therapy or clinical psych, because the mental component is so profound. I think that is at the root. Same with pain patients. When you need physical touch is very therapeutic. When you need physical therapy or rehabilitation, that too. How does that change? I'm not sure. But even the next year, I think things are going to be different. And the difference also is the testing. The diagnostic tools that we have allows us to treat better. Why? Because now we can be hyper specific with treatment. Often enough, I do the test not because I need to, but it's to show the patient this is exactly what you're going through. I've already seen your pattern before, so your story is not unique to me while it's unique to you. But the test provides clarity for them, like, oh, okay, now I get it. This is why I've been struggling for so many years. So the diagnostics, the tools, the treatment solutions are certainly improving fast. Like I said, the stem cells, the exosomes, the peptides. I In terms of GI, again, which has been my lens, but it's enabled me to serve mental health patients, to treat people with chronic pain, to treat derm patients or children, any sort of gut issues, sleep issues, hormone imbalances. We've been able to correct all of that. Peptides have been the huge accelerator. I mean, I can't even make this up. Literally, I had a guy walk in. He was on crutches, severe level of pain on the bottom of his foot, and in 2 days he was off crutches. And I know their family well, and I asked his wife sometime later. I said, "Was that BS?" What he told me, and I go, "No, that was crazy, Daniel." And it holds true. I think I shared on my podcast. We had a female stroke patient, level 178 out of 10 knee pain. So I always ask patients 1 to 10, where is your pain at? Because my goal is to make a 50% improvement or better. Usually, I want them to walk out with no pain, and I see now that's feasible with peptides. She walked out with no pain. She's like, this is remarkable. She couldn't stop rubbing her knee during the appointment because she was in such a degree of pain. So peptides, to me, these are these very potent signaling molecules, really can move the needle faster. And peptides continuously evolve, even though some are taken off the list, some are put on the list. Insulin is a peptide, as an example. GLP-1s, peptides. To provide a frame of reference of what this is, in terms of healing and sealing the gut lining, which the perturbations often are from our backwards living, right? We're sleep deprived, overfed, malnourished, under recovered, and now you layer in the chemical soup that we're exposed to.
Anything that you would either advise or suggest or recommend for mental health professionals to consider, as we're seeing these patients come in with anxiety, depression, PTSD, chronic fatigue, sleep issues, anything that you would recommend or suggest for specifically the mental health professionals who are dealing and seeing these things?
So I'm biased, okay? And, I hope that clinicians can honor their biases. The good part is, within my bias, I've been able to help more and more people. So I see that when you start with the gut, you can really intervene on a high level. Why? Because our microbiome now interacts with every biological system in the body. And so looking at the prevalence of SSRIs or opiate epidemic, let's look at serotonin. 90 to 95% is in the GI tract, specifically in the pterochromic cells that line the gut, in the intestinal mucosa. So serotonin regulates gut motility, secretion, blood flow, immune signaling. Obviously, there's a component here that's going to provide calm and peace and love, similar to oxytocin in different respects. But our microbiome will influence in our serotonin production. And earlier I meant the signatures or specific microbes that will synthesize or stimulate the release of serotonin precursors. So when you look at the brain, CNS, an example, 5 to 10% of total serotonin is synthesized by the neurons in the brain. So we really have to take a look at the gut brain axis and obviously how serotonin can affect mood and behavior. So that is one huge component, is do not overlook the impact of the gut, because if so, you are missing a huge piece of the puzzle. So when I can say this ubiquitously for all our mental health patients, I have so many testimonials that I don't treat them as mental health patients. I treat them as gut dysbiosis patients. And when I they are coming down and completely off all their medications. There's no more need. So is it a brain issue or is it a gut issue? My goal is to just ask different questions. And I think when you said, what's what's going to happen in the next 5 years, is I'm just going to ask more different questions, right? And how we can impact. Going back to the foundation five. Someone's got to eat right, sleep right, move right, talk right, poop right, and you got to feel right. So the sleep, if you're not sleeping, you're not repairing. If you're not moving, again, I mentioned this component of skeletal muscle acts as an endocrine organ, right? It releases the myokines, which signals proteins that are anti-inflammatory, which is critical for healthy brain function, because if not, neuroinflammation. The poop right, so going back to the gut, the eat right is the nutrition, right? So eating right, you're not going to be sleeping right, you're not going to be healing right. And then talk right is really kind of where you come in. And I try to instill words of affirmation and positivity and helping paint a picture of where they're self-sabotaging or where they're in their environment that, again, isn't conducive to healing their stuff, whether that's with their spouses. I don't want to say fortunately or unfortunately, but I've had many people that have decided to separate after visiting me. And the premise is that they were not able to live in their true self because at home it wasn't an environment that was healthy. I have two specific non-negotiables in my home life. Number one, no yelling, because that creates a huge environment of fear and danger and lack of safety, especially for children. And number two is nutrition, because it's such a powerful input. And as long as those two are met, I'm pretty easygoing, right? I'm kind of living in a state of euphoria for the most of the time. But most people have these non-negotiables that they either don't realize or that they don't have met, and it cracks in the foundation, and they begin to just overlook it or push it to the side until it becomes a big problem. And usually that big problem is as a consequence of their own health. So sometimes you have to look at what's going on at home. Who are you as a parent, as a friend, as a son, as a father, as a teacher, as a patient, as a fill in the blank? So how are you showing up every day? Are you living with intent or not? I think I said on my podcast, I live now by the mantra of Derek Sivers, who put it best: hell yeah or hell no. Protect what you say yes to. Where your attention goes, your energy flows. And what you don't realize in our modern era, we're just constantly pushed, especially if you have kids. I say now in the evening, I'm a chaperone, right? And I do it with pleasure, but understand is that where is the balance? Where do I have my own sense of self? Because again, if we're selfless, we lose our sense of self. So we need to just evaluate where, and I don't necessarily believe in balance anymore. I believe more in priorities, because that will take discipline. Motivation is fleeting. So what we have to do is just take a step back and probably write it down. It's a good exercise. just see, okay, what is serving me? What is not? Am I living with intention in each moment? Am I not? Am I saying yes because I feel bad? Or is it because that's something that really excites me? So the Japanese determine, your ikigai, your reason why you wake up every morning, that's part of our clinical intake. I ask someone, what's your, and they look at me like I'm crazy. And sometimes they can identify, but more often than not. And sometimes they say, I don't know, and that's okay. In that respect, I say, pursue your passions, and sometimes you'll find your purpose. It's interesting because one of my patients said it best. He's like, Daniel, have you ever heard of the adage, man plans and God laughs? So, regardless of any sort of spirituality or dogma, I think that's true because you meet someone and then that opens up a new door. You have to be open to receive. But often we're kind of in this closed-minded state, or we're limited by our self-beliefs and self-doubts. And it's like the man who has always the answer is probably the most foolish in the room. We're in the wrong room and not asking the right questions. So it's we don't know what we don't know, and then when you can honor that, it invites so much curiosity. Kids laugh. I think it's approximately 140 times a day. Adults 14, and kids enclosed, right? So the problem is we walk without purpose. We live without intention. We don't incorporate enough play. So I created spend philosophy, and it's an acronym for spending your best life. And the root of it is S, and S is quite profound, but it's stress, it's sleep, it's stool, it's spirit, it's steps, and for our adults, sex, so hormones. Then the next tier is P, play and purpose. Then the next tier is E for exercise. Then the next tier is N for nourish. And then the final, like Maslow's hierarchy almost in a way, the D is donate. And my goal is to give back. And where you can't give back with time, you certainly can give back with dollars. You asked the question that piqued my interest earlier. It's crazy to me that we have people who are homeless that live and die in the streets, especially in third world countries. The distribution of wealth is so severe, and unfortunately, that's inherent to our capitalistic structure. And there's good in that, which drives innovation, right? So we see why communism can fail in a utopia, but I still live by utopian norms. Is everyone equal in my book? Yes, but certainly we don't see that true in terms of why some people live in a tent versus other people live, in these huge homes and have 14 cars. So, and I don't want to take any away from success. The component is, okay, where are we considering the welfare of humanity when we design policy? So again, I just try to ask different questions. I try to look at things and try to step back and say, okay, what's going to be the best way to move forward in any situation? And my goal is to evaluate. And in terms of evaluation, very quickly, what's interesting to me, what was ingrained, is that it's not the first thought that is interesting. It's not even the second. It's when you have the ability to step back and kind of think about your thoughts and then realize that, again, you come in with those biases. You formulate better thoughts after, thinking about something. But in our modern society, it's like ready, fire, aim. We just speed to lead, sensationalism, news. It's just whoever can put things out the fastest, social media, but it often lacks quality and integrity.
There's a therapeutic tool that we do. It's comes from the range modality of acceptance and commitment therapy, but it talks a lot about values. And it basically says that, when people live according to their values, they tend to be the happiest, the most happiest. And one of the things that's interesting, though, is that when you ask people the question of like, are they living according to their values, whether it's health, whether it's career, whether it's social relationships, or all these other different components of their values, they might have a high priority of certain values, but when you look at their life, there's no evidence that they even have that as a priority for themselves. And so if you're watching their life as if it's like a movie, they have all these values, but they're not spending time with their family and their kids. They're not spending time with their passions. And so you wonder why sometimes there's that discrepancy between their happiness and how they're actually living according to their values. And it shows you how much effort and intentionality and mindset it takes to live according to someone's values. There's so many different components that we've talked about, Dr. Chille, and I know we could talk in terms of these concepts, but, just in terms of wrapping up, I'm thinking about all of the components that we have talked about the exercise, the sleep, the nutrition. For me as a psychologist, I think about things like mindfulness and breath work and therapeutic tools. But then we've also talked about the social component and purpose and living in a sense of intentionality. For me, I've seen some of the research and as it relates to even spirituality as a component too of that health. For you, because you clearly give so much to your patients, to your practice, to your family, how do you give back to yourself? And this is a question I ask all of my guests in terms of closing out, is how do you fill your cup back up in terms of what you do for yourself?
I had a trainer some time ago, and she asked me, how do you unwind? Like, how do you detach? What do you do for you? And I said, oh, I like to read. I like to play chess. I love documentaries because I just have this yearning um, quest for knowledge. And she goes, no, no, no. Like, how do you just sit and do nothing and sit still and be with yourself? And I go, oh boy, drop the mic. I don't. It doesn't exist. I don't know how. Guilty as charged. Like again, it's this mantra that I'm never enough. I got to keep learning. I got to keep growing. I got to stay current. I got to help my patients better. I have to, again, be a father, a son, a friend. Like, I got to always be somewhere. So I'm never balanced. The goalpost is constantly moving. My ambition, because we live in an ambitious culture, and I got to prove to somebody else how many people I can heal or whatever the case. It's just nonstop. And then I looked at it and I said, well, what am I doing? This is actually contradictory to everything that I. And so what I've done recently is I've given myself the space to do me. So what does do me mean is make sure that I'm disciplined in my exercise. So I'm focusing on the body and the connection with the mind. I'm making sure that I am obviously getting the right nutrients in. Uh, I'm trying to prioritize sleep and detach. Um, so again, going to my foundational 5 principles, I'm trying to pursue more time for me, but see that is it's still broken. And so my daughter, really quickly, a few weeks ago, she said, "Dad, why don't you spend more time with us?" Dagger to the heart, because what I'm trying to do is scale and grow as fast as I can so that I can integrate the systems, be able to replace myself. Burnout is certainly real. This is why, because we try to push as hard as we can and then try to prepare ourselves later, right? It's that whole notion of sleep is an afterthought. So is kind of our health sometimes. That peptides is a shortcut to try to even that. There's no substitute. At least same thing with exercise. There's no substitute in a pill. Maybe follistatin at some point here, myostatin, we can replicate that. But anyway, so what I did was we took literally 2 weeks after that. I told my partner we're booking a flight and we're going, and we're just taking a trip. And then I disconnected for 4 days. But what's even more interesting is my father-in-law says, I don't understand. He's not from here. He's in Europe. He's like, I don't understand you Americans. You guys just go for a long weekend versus in Europe, it's like 6 weeks off. Like that's the epitome of you, right? Here, like a quick and then you're back into it. And I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. But I do integrate these periods. As an example, like last year, took some time off, 6 weeks off. Not completely, because I don't know how to detach, so I'm still taking patients and doing telehealth. In a different environment, which is a lot more for my family, and I'm a lot more connected and a lot more present. And so, what I have done is prioritized a different lifestyle that's conducive for my proclivities and my priorities.
And so, thank you so much for just sharing your heart, your thoughts, and your mindset with all of these health components, Dr. Chille. It's been really a pleasure talking with you today. How can people maybe see you from a social media perspective?
We are down the road from you, actually. So Total Body Diagnostics. Our handle on social is TBD Fit, like to be determined. TBD Fit, FIT, and then that's the website too. TBD Fit. if someone wants to learn more. As clinicians, we have mentorship that we offer, and then obviously patients who are looking for telehealth or any way that we can help, we're glad to do that.
Love that. Love that. We'll definitely leave down those links. Again, it's been a pleasure, and we will continue to stay in touch.
Thank you so much.